my own personal experience around mindful listening. Again, our teacher, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, has said that our life is our message. And as a Quaker, one of our deepest sayings is, let your life speak. So my personal experience. So I became a lawyer long before I knew who I was. I actually was a lobbyist. I'm not sure if you have that in the UK, I'm sure you do. But someone who is stock in trade is about power and influence. The lobbyist is the person who's the go-between, between warring political parties, and who seeks to persuade and influence people in power to essentially do what they otherwise would not do. And so I had trained all of my life for this job. And as you might suspect, I was very much the aggressive, type A, get it done, kick ass lawyer. That was who I had trained myself to be. But underneath all of that, of course, was a lot of sadness, a lot of racialized trauma, and a lot of fear. So at 18, I became an independent student, meaning that I had no parental supervision and no parental support. And that's a long story, but essentially growing up like many other people with a lot of violence, with a lot of fear, brokenness. So I did a lot of running. And I got very, very lucky. So in 1995, like 25 years ago, I happened to stumble into Riverside Church in Manhattan. My brother was living, we have an apartment just down the street from the church. And my brother said, oh, why don't you go down there? There's this monk guy giving a talk. And the monk guy was Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. So I walked into the talk and I was hard as nails. I left and Ty was talking about peace and love and compassion. And I thought, I have no idea what that guy's talking about. And I walked out of there like, forget this guy. But, I had other stuff that happened. Life happens. One of the other big things that happened was I got divorced. And one of the things that my husband said for the reason he wanted to get divorced was he said, Valerie, you do not listen. And he was right. The big shot lawyer, I had the answer even before he asked the question. But that moment at Riverside Church, at the talk, something broke loose. I started to realize this is not working for me, what I'm doing. And so I started to go to local Sanghas and started practicing and created a Sangha in my local neighborhood, joined the Order of Interbeing in 2003, and became an order member. But really what happened, I started practicing metta or loving kindness, not in a narcissistic way. But I thought, well, if I can have kindness for myself, that's a big deal because I was so hard on myself. If I can have kindness for myself, then maybe I might have kindness for other people. The truth was, I wasn't very kind at all, not to myself and not to others. So I began in earnest, just every day, every night, I would go to sleep with these verses in my head. May I be happy. May I be tender. May I be kind. I just directed metta at myself, no one else. I just kept saying the verses over and over again. And slowly, little by little, I began to feel a softening that happened within me. That softening not only extended in my personal life, but it started to extend in my work life. You know, as a lobbyist and a lawyer trying to bully and aggressively influence other people, I began to soften within, literally within my body. I began to relax deep, deep muscles inside. I switched my focus from trying to convince people that I'm right to trying to understand others. And that shift showed up in greater generosity and sincerity and understanding. So our teacher says, often quotes the American theologian Paul Tillich, Tillich has said that the first duty of love is to listen. The first duty of love is to listen. And we know that listening is so close to love that most of us cannot tell the difference between being listened to deeply and being loved. And this has many characteristics that you've already pointed to. It's kind of this holding of space for something new and generative to emerge. It's listening for what is expressed, but what is unexpressed. We know that we primarily communicate non-verbally. It's listening not for rebuttal, not for disagreement, like picking holes in somebody else's argument or statement, but listening for understanding. Tai says it's to relieve the suffering of another person. Imagine that without picking up even your baby pinky finger, just by being present, you've helped somebody. You've given somebody something magnificent. You haven't said anything. You haven't solved anybody's problem. So it requires a kind of non-agenda, as we said, non-attachment. So speaking and listening go hand in hand. And with speaking, it's really important not to underestimate the power of our presence. Even in this format, we can get a sense of the human being that is present. We can sense that comes through even in this vehicle of video. So we live, as many researchers have said, with continuous partial attention. You know, our attention is like a firefly. It alights, little here, little there. And so to be this kind of grounded presence, like that beautiful image of the cool lake, is a true refuge. So we live with great dividedness, much more so now. Feeling that we have to be right, maybe we don't like the political party that exists or whatever. But here are some things to consider. You might call them best practices. The first is to speak your truth in a way that respects other people's truth. Speaking truthfully, respecting others. The hitch here is respect. Now that's a discussion. But to speak in this way doesn't mean that there isn't conflict. It doesn't mean that we don't hold each other accountable, but that we really explore what does respect look like. The second is to never lose sight that the purpose of speaking is, as best we can, to inspire other people toward compassion and hope and joy. The third is trying to convince other people that we're right and they're not so right. That is way too small for you. Too small. You're bigger than that, because love is bigger than that. Compassion is bigger than that. And so we go for that bigness. Rightness is way too small. Compassion is way bigger. There is a litmus test before you speak, and there's others, but here's one litmus test. Like before we speak, this is what I ask myself. Is it truthful? Is it useful? Is it timely? Have people moved on? Is it compassionate? Not every time 100%, but it's a pretty decent checklist. Is it truthful, useful, timely, compassionate? So to recap, listening as an act of love, holding space for something new to emerge, listen for what is expressed and unexpressed, listen without rebuttal. There'll be a time for you to get involved in another discussion. Speak truth and respect other people's truth. Inspire, not convince. And the litmus test is it truthful, useful, timely, and compassionate. So we are flowers. We are flowers in the garden of humanity. You cannot open a flower with a sledgehammer. And so this requires that we move at a human pace and a human speed, and that is the speed of trust. And this is what I've learned from this amazing teacher, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, from many other teachers in my life. So thank you for listening to the talk. A deep bow and deep gratitude. So we can turn the recording off.